Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I am here to do kind of a chatty, relaxed review slash discussion. I don't exactly know how this is going to turn out or what form it will be in, but basically I'm going to do a video talking about the Lord of the Rings trilogy and how it ended up being an unexpectedly perfect thing to read in 2020. So the books in this series are, of course, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's a very well-known trilogy, and I have mentioned in wrap-ups that it was an ongoing buddy read with my friends Katie, Vendy, and Kelsey. I will link all of them down below. They are all lovely. And we started doing this early in the year. The last book ended up taking us longer to read because we all had things going on. But we were doing it as a buddy read throughout the year, and while I was rereading it, or in the case of the third book, I was finally finishing it for the first time, I just kept thinking about the fact that this is a series that is very... It resonated a lot for me in 2020, and I think partly it's just that because I'm an adult now, coming back to these books, there are aspects of them that hit so much harder that I probably didn't feel that way when I was younger, but I also think that this series really was a perfect thing to read and to reread in 2020, which was obviously a very difficult year for a lot of us, basically everybody, I think. So I have some notes here, but again, this probably won't be as structured as some of my reviews tend to be. But before I get into the rest of it, I do want to mention, I totally understand that this is not a series for everyone. This video is not me saying everybody has to read this series or it's required reading for fantasy lovers or anything like that. I absolutely understand that it is not to everyone's tastes. It can be very slow. The writing can be very dense. It is very character focused. And yeah, there's just a lot of reasons why I understand that this is not for everyone. And this video is not me trying to convince you that it's for everyone. And like I said, I also don't think that it should be required reading for fantasy or anything. I do think it's an important series in the genre, but if it doesn't interest you, you don't need to read it. And I also think that it's, as a series, yes, part of the reason that I think people still read and talk about it is because it was kind of the codifier for some fantasy tropes. But I also think that it stands on its own. I think that the Lord of the Rings trilogy has its own merits, separate from the fact that, well, it did something first, so I guess that's why people care about it. So before I get into specifically why it was great for 2020, I do want to talk about some things that I just love about the series in general. And I think just some of the reasons that it really worked for me. So one thing I love about the series is the way that it is simultaneously very small and very sweeping. All of these characters basically are pretty ordinary. They're not great heroes, they're not chosen ones, even the ones who are kind of chosen ones are not really chosen ones, and I really like that. And I like that it's this story that it's set in this very expansive world. It has these really high stakes that affect the entire world basically, but it's still a story built on the courage of ordinary people. And I really love that. I also think it's a very cozy series for me, and part of that is because I just grew up loving these movies. It's one of the only things that me and my mom both enjoy that is fantasy, because she does not like fantasy, but she loves Lord of the Rings. So that was always an important bonding thing for us. And I just have memories, good memories and cozy memories associated with this story. I only ever read the series once when I was very young, and I remember vaguely liking it. But most of my love for the story comes from the movies. And as I've mentioned, I do remember enjoying it when I read it, but I was not expecting this series to hit me the way that it did. This is for sure one of my all-time favorite series now. And I was just not expecting it to be so deeply in my heart and soul after rereading it in 2020. But it did. I also really adore the characters of this series so much. Probably the biggest surprise, which I have mentioned in wrap-ups, is Frodo. Because it's not that I dislike him in the movie, but he's just kind of fine. He's the main character, but he's not the most interesting character. Whereas in the books, I love Frodo so much. And I have talked before about how I think part of the reason is the things that I love about him are very hard to show in movie format. It's all about his thoughts and his feelings and the reason he does things. Things that are very inner life type things that are very hard to communicate on a screen. But yeah, I love Frodo. I love Merry and Pippin. I love Sam. I love Éowyn. Éowyn is my girl. I just love all these characters so much. I love Faramir. Of course, we have Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, who are also great. I just truly love all of these characters. Like, I think I basically love all the characters you're supposed to love, which is something I point out specifically when it happens because it doesn't happen a lot. But yeah, I'm a very character-focused reader, so the fact that this series is so strong on the characters is definitely one of the reasons I enjoy it. I was also pretty concerned about the writing when I started the reread because I don't tend to like dense, heavy, very descriptive writing styles, which Tolkien definitely is, but I actually really enjoyed it. Like, I think the thing that worked about it for me is that it was descriptive, but it was used for a purpose. Like, Tolkien really does use all of this page time and all of these words to really describe, like, so that you can really picture the setting, or you can really picture these characters. Like, the way that he can set up characterization with just a few well-chosen phrases or sentences is just very impressive to me. Another thing I love about this series is the emotional depth and the emotional investment. I know this story really, really well, and there were still moments that really got to me. Like, despite the fact I knew it was coming, despite the fact that I have seen it many times before, like one of the parts I mentioned in Two Towers is like, I won't give any spoilers, but like the part with "don't go where I can't follow" broke me. Like, I just can't even put into words how emotional this series is for me. And I really admire the way that even though Tolkien does over-describe things, it doesn't come at the expense of these really small character moments and like emotional moments, which is obviously something that I really care about, that I really enjoy. I also think this series is a fantastic example of the fact that you can have well-developed, complex characters who are also good people. I have talked before about how as I get older, and maybe partly because of the state the world is in, like, I am just having less and less patience for anti-heroes, or for like morally gray characters unless they're done in a very particular way. And I just love the fact that this series shows that you can have really wonderful character arcs, you can have complex characters, you can have inner conflict that does not revolve around a character like being torn between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing. Like, being good does not make you boring, and being good does not mean you don't make mistakes. And I just really love the way that this series exemplifies that. I also really love the way that this series blends these really intense emotional experiences so well. At least for me, like, there is grief and sacrifice and joy and bittersweetness and humor, and like, it just, like, the tone of this series, I think, is so varied, but still feels very, like, cohesive. It's like a very satisfying experience for me. Tolkien doesn't take the shortcuts that I think other authors do to, like, make you feel something. I just think it's very impressive. I also mentioned earlier, like, the Chosen One thing. I'm not a big fan of Chosen One stories usually, and I just think it's very cool how this story is a Chosen One story, and yet it's not. Like, it kind of plays that trope straight, but it also subverts it. Like, Frodo is kind of the chosen one, but he's also still very much an ordinary person. And I think that's why his story is so poignant, is because he's somebody who is very aware of the fact that he's normal and he's trying to be a hero. Another thing that is really important to me in books is themes, and this is another thing I love about this series. And I'll get into this a lot more in the next part of this video, so like I won't go into it too much here, but things about friendship and love and sacrifice and bravery. And another thing that I think is cool is, though, even though it's like a very, in some ways it's a very typical fantasy, like, oh, we have to put the king back on the throne because he's the rightful ruler kind of thing, I think in some ways it kind of subverts that a little bit. Like, there are some aspects of this that definitely play into those like classic fantasy tropes, but the fact that the hobbits are like some of the most important characters, that like, that they're the ones who kind of save the day, that these very like ordinary, not noble, not royal characters are the focus of the book, and like the bravest and most, I don't want to say most important because I think all the characters are important, but like Frodo and Sam are kind of some of the main heroes of this book, and they're hobbits. They're very ordinary. They're not royal. They're not noble. They just care about the world and the people in it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about why this series was so perfect for 2020, or why I think it like hit so hard in 2020, and why I'm very glad that we read it that year. Also, I'm very sorry for this lighting, whatever is happening here, so hopefully this isn't too distracting. I think one of the like obvious reasons that this was a very good series in that year is how almost like cathartic it felt to see some of our stress or fear reflected in it, because The Lord of the Rings is a series like with this really huge threat and fear, and that definitely kind of made me think of the pandemic, but it's also about courage in the face of that. Like there's this feeling of hopelessness and hopefulness that is perfectly balanced throughout the series, and I think both of those things were very healing to read because we were seeing suffering reflected, but we were also seeing people come through it. And I think both of those things were really important to experience when we were all going through this really, really difficult year. So the story is about this fear and this threat, but it's also about courage in the face of that. And that was another thing that was very hopeful and inspiring to read, because even though we can see stories and we can know about there being good people in the world and there are people who are working to fight these terrible things, it's nice to be reminded of that in books as well. And I think something that really exemplifies that kind of like fear but also hope is one of my favorite lines, which is in the first book, and Gandalf has just told Frodo about the ring and what this means and what Frodo is going to have to accomplish, and Gandalf has said something about like what a time this is, and Frodo says, "I wish it need not have happened in mine," and Gandalf says, "And so do all who live to see such times, but all we can do is our best with the time we are given." Or something to that effect. It's paraphrased a little bit. And going along with this kind of balance of fear and hope, I think one thing that really resonated about this story is that it's a story about bad times that feel like they'll never end, but they do. And I think that's a very hopeful thing to read. And also, like, I've been saying 2020, but this applies to, obviously 2021 has started out to be a very intense and difficult year as well. So I think that reading a story about people making it through was very, very important. And something I mentioned earlier is the fact that there are so many characters in The Lord of the Rings who are very ordinary in a lot of ways, and I love that. And I think one of the things I love about the series is not just that the characters are ordinary, but there's the real emphasis on not just ordinary people themselves, but the strength and bravery of ordinary people. And the fact that like normal, average, everyday people still have stories worth telling, and that you are worthy of being a main character. Like, they're not the most dramatic heroes, they're not the most exciting or flashy almost, but these characters are still worthy of, like, these characters are still capable of doing great deeds, and they're worthy of having their stories told. And I think that's something too that, like, I always appreciate, but I especially appreciated in such a stressful year, being reminded of the value of everybody, the value of, again, ordinary people. And something else I love about these characters, which I have kind of been talking about and I will talk about more, but I want to specifically mention it, is their bravery. And this kind of courage that is not like wanting to fight because of the glory it will bring, or being willing to fight because you're not afraid or anything. It's like they are afraid. And the courage that the Lord of the Rings series values is courage when you are afraid, courage in the face of suffering, and the kind of bravery it takes to do something, not to succeed even, but just to do anyway. Like, there are so many times throughout this series where the characters will realize and acknowledge to themselves that they probably won't be able to accomplish this thing that they need to do, and they try anyway. And it's not even like they try with this small hope that it'll work out, although maybe they are hoping it'll work out. It's that they recognize that this is such an important thing that even if they feel hopeless, even if they feel like there's no way this could work out, they know that they have to try, that they have no other choice, that they would not want to live with knowing that they had this opportunity and did not try to save people. And I just think that's really beautiful. Sometimes you have courage because you hope that you can succeed, and sometimes you have courage even though you don't think you can. And I don't mean like people putting themselves in danger for no reason. I mean like when people have made up their mind to try to do something, and then they're faced with it and they realize that they don't actually know for sure if it's going to make a difference, but they know that they have to try to make a difference anyway. And then kind of the last thing I have on my list here is something else I really love about this series, is that it's a story that really emphasizes small joys and small comforts, like the coziness of the Shire, and like the way that these characters who have all been through so much some of them, for quite a lot of them. Like the things that they want most is to be like safe at home and to have a warm bed and to get to eat their favorite food and things like that. And I think especially with self-isolation and just the general like fear and everything, being able to find joy in very small moments or very small things was a really, really important thing. And that's another thing that I love about the series and that felt very like appropriate for the year that we had. Okay, everybody, so that was my very rambling, very probably unfocused discussion on the Lord of the Rings trilogy and why it ended up being such a perfect thing to reread in the absolute disaster that was 2020. And I was thinking mainly in the context of the pandemic, but I think a lot of these things would apply to just like any kind of fear or suffering or difficult year. So yeah, those were just kind of like my thoughts on the series, on some things I love about it and some things that I really appreciate so much more as an adult, and especially in the kind of year that we had. And yeah, I have no idea how this video is going to turn out. And like I said at the beginning, this is not like me trying to convince everyone to read Lord of the Rings, because I know it's not a series for everyone. It just really, really ended up being a series for me, even more than I expected. Like obviously I hoped to enjoy it, I remembered enjoying it, but yeah, this is like one of my favorite things that I've read now, so love it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!